I was 22 when I decided to start my own business. I had just graduated from college with a degree in marketing, and like most fresh grads, I was eager to jump into the corporate world. But a few months of interning and applying for jobs left me frustrated. It wasn't the work I minded, it was the idea of spending the next 40 years of my life working for someone else. I wanted more freedom, more creativity, and more control over my own life. One evening, I sat in my cramped apartment, scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself from the gnawing anxiety about my future. That's when I saw an ad for an online course on starting your own e-commerce business. I'd always been a bit of a tech nerd, and I thought, why not? It seemed like the perfect combination of creativity, technology, and business. I had no idea what I was doing, but I signed up for the course, hoping it would give me some direction. Over the next few weeks, I learned about dropshipping, SEO, email marketing, and all the other digital tools that make e-commerce tick. I was in over my head, but I was determined to learn. My friends thought I was crazy. You're still figuring out life, and you want to run a business, one of them said. But I didn't care. The more I learned, the more I realized this could be the thing that changed everything. The idea of running my own business was intoxicating. I spent countless late nights watching videos, reading articles, and building my website. I started with a dropshipping model, choosing a niche I was passionate about, fitness accessories. I spent weeks sourcing products, creating a simple Shopify store, and designing ads for Facebook and Instagram. My initial budget was small, about $500. I figured it was a minimal risk since I wasn't holding any inventory. The first few weeks were discouraging. I spent money on ads, but my sales were minimal. I had to constantly tweak my website, adjust my ads, and learn from my mistakes. It felt like an uphill battle. Every time I thought I had a breakthrough, I'd face another roadblock. Shipping times were slower than expected, and my conversion rates weren't great. But I kept going, even when it seemed like I wasn't getting anywhere. I'll never forget the day I made my first sale. It wasn't much, a $25 order for a set of dumbbells. But to me, it was everything. It felt like proof that my idea wasn't just some pipe dream. I could actually make this work. From there, things slowly started to pick up. I refined my marketing strategies, ran better ads, and optimized my website. Sales trickled in, and while I wasn't making a fortune, I was making progress. My small wins kept me motivated. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. About 6 months in, I hit a major snag. The supplier I was using for a popular product raised their prices, and the margins I had been relying on disappeared overnight. I remember feeling like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I had to make a quick decision. Either I raised my prices and risked losing customers, or I absorbed the cost and risked losing money. After a lot of sleepless nights, I decided to raise my prices slightly and rework my marketing strategy to justify the increase. To my surprise, it worked. Customers didn't mind the price increase as much as I had feared. They were still buying, and I learned an important lesson. You can't control every aspect of your business, but you can control how you adapt to challenges. Around the 1-year mark, my business was making enough money for me to quit my day job and focus on it full-time. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't glamorous, but it was incredibly rewarding. I was finally in control of my own future. I had a long way to go, but the idea of working for myself, setting my own hours, and making decisions that directly impacted my success was exhilarating. But there was still one major challenge: marketing. As the business grew, I realized that I couldn't rely on Facebook ads alone. The platform was becoming oversaturated, and I needed to diversify my marketing strategy. I started exploring influencer marketing, and that's when everything changed. I reached out to a fitness influencer with about 50,000 followers. At first, she was hesitant. She'd been approached by countless businesses before, and she wasn't sure I had a solid product. But I took the time to explain my business, my values, and how my products could fit with her audience. Eventually, she agreed to run a sponsored post. The results were phenomenal. Sales surged, and my brand got exposure that would have taken me years to achieve on my own. That one partnership opened the door to collaborations with several other influencers, which helped me scale my business even further. As I expanded, I faced new challenges, including managing customer service and keeping up with inventory. My small team grew, and I learned how to delegate responsibilities and trust others with parts of the business I had been doing on my own. It was hard at first, but I realized that scaling meant letting go of control and allowing others to help. 2 years after starting my business, I was able to hire a full-time customer service team, a content creator, and a few more employees to help with the operational side of things. I moved into a small office space and finally felt like I had a legitimate company. The freedom I had once dreamed about became a reality. Looking back, it's surreal to think about how far I've come. My business has grown from a small dropshipping store into a six-figure e-commerce brand. I've learned more than I ever expected about marketing, leadership, customer service, and most importantly, resilience. I've faced failure after failure, but each time I've gotten up, dusted myself off, and tried again. If you're reading this and you're thinking about starting your own business, I have one piece of advice: keep going. It's easy to give up when things don't go as planned, but those who succeed are the ones who keep pushing through the tough times. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but if you're willing to learn and adapt, anything is possible. Success isn't about never failing. It's about learning from those failures and continuing to move forward, one step at a time. My journey isn't over yet, but I'm proud of what I've accomplished, and I'm even more excited for what's to come. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. In 2015, I found myself sitting at a small desk in the corner of my cramped apartment, staring at my laptop. The hum of the refrigerator in the next room was the only sound in the otherwise quiet space. It was a Saturday, and instead of being out with friends or enjoying a weekend away, I was hunched over my computer, trying to figure out how to make my side hustle work. I was 28 years old, living paycheck to paycheck, and working a job that drained every ounce of energy from me. I was an account manager at a tech company, which meant I was stuck in meetings all day, answering endless emails, and managing clients who didn't always appreciate the work I was doing. I was burned out, and I was beginning to feel like I was on the edge of a midlife crisis at a time when I should have been at the height of my career. But what really bothered me was that I had no passion for what I was doing. Every day felt the same. I knew that if I didn't do something soon, I would find myself stuck in this cycle forever. That's when I stumbled across a podcast about e-commerce. The idea of building an online store and selling products seemed like an easy enough way to make money. There were stories of people making thousands of dollars a day with their online stores, and it sounded like the perfect escape. I wasn't afraid of hard work, and I had a natural knack for marketing, so it seemed like the right fit. I immediately jumped into the world of dropshipping. If you don't know what that is, it's a business model where you set up an online store, market products, and when a customer buys from your store, the supplier ships the product directly to the customer. No need to hold inventory, which sounded like the perfect model for someone like me who didn't have a lot of money to start with. I spent the next few weeks researching everything I could about dropshipping. I bought a course, watched countless YouTube videos, and joined a Facebook group filled with other aspiring entrepreneurs. But despite all the research, nothing prepared me for the reality of actually starting a business. In the beginning, I made every mistake in the book. I spent hours building a Shopify store, only for it to look terrible. My first product selection was awful, and I had no idea how to set up effective Facebook ads. But I didn't give up. I continued tweaking and improving. I spent nights learning how to make better ads, finding better products, and optimizing my store. After months of trial and error, I finally saw my first sale. It wasn't much, only $25, but it was enough to convince me that this could work. The first sale wasn't just about the money. It was proof that someone, somewhere, trusted me enough to buy from my store. That moment was everything. But just when I thought I was on my way to success, disaster struck. My supplier messed up a shipment, and the customer who had purchased from my store was furious. I was devastated. I tried to make it right, but it was a wake-up call. If I was going to be successful, I needed to step up my game. I took the failure as an opportunity to learn. I started reaching out to suppliers to vet them properly, making sure they had good reputations and reliable shipping times. I worked on my customer service, learning how to respond quickly and professionally to complaints. Slowly but surely, things started to improve. By early 2017, my online store was making a few $100s a month. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to cover my monthly expenses and give me hope. I started to scale up by adding more products and running better Facebook ads. Eventually, my revenue grew to the point where I was making over $2,000 a month. I could feel the momentum building, and I knew it was only a matter of time before I could go full-time with my business. But I was scared. The thought of quitting my day job, the security of a steady paycheck, terrified me. What if I failed? What if my business crashed and burned? I spent months deliberating, worrying about what could go wrong. But then, something inside me clicked. I realized that if I didn't take the leap now, I would always regret it. In the summer of 2017, I made the decision to quit my job. It was a risk, but I knew I had to give my business the attention it needed to grow. I was all in, no turning back. For the next 6 months, I worked harder than I ever had in my life. I focused on improving my marketing, optimizing my website, and increasing sales. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like giving up, but I kept pushing forward. And slowly, my revenue started to increase. By the end of 2017, my store was making over $10,000 a month in sales. I was finally living my dream of being a full-time entrepreneur. But the road to success wasn't a straight line. There were ups and downs, and I had to adapt quickly. In 2018, Facebook changed its algorithm, which meant that my ads weren't reaching as many people as they used to. It was a huge setback, and for a while, I thought I might have to shut down my business. But I didn't give up. Instead, I pivoted. I learned how to leverage Instagram, Google Ads, and email marketing to continue growing my store. I started building a brand around my products, focusing on creating an experience for my customers, rather than just selling them things. By the end of 2019, my store was making $50,000 a month in revenue. I had hired a small team of people to help with customer service and fulfillment, and I was finally able to take a step back and focus on scaling the business. In 2020, my business hit 6 figures. I had achieved what I once thought was impossible. I had turned my side hustle into a full-fledged business, and I was finally living the life I had dreamed of. But more than the money or the success, what mattered most was the sense of fulfillment I felt every day. Looking back, I realize how much I've grown. I've learned more about business, marketing, and entrepreneurship than I ever thought possible. The journey hasn't been easy, and there have been plenty of failures along the way, but it's all been worth it. If there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that persistence is key. You will face setbacks, you will make mistakes, and you will fail. But if you keep learning, keep improving, and keep pushing forward, success is inevitable. I'm not done yet. There's still so much more to do. But I'm proud of how far I've come, and I know that my story is just beginning. I'll be honest, I never thought I'd be here. A few years ago, I was just another college dropout working odd jobs to scrape by, living paycheck to paycheck. But somehow, I managed to turn my life around, and today I'm running a successful e-commerce business that pulls in 6 figures annually. But this wasn't some magical overnight success. It was a roller coaster of failure, doubt, perseverance, and ultimately, learning to trust my instincts. Let me take you back to the beginning. It was 2017 when I dropped out of college. I had always hated the traditional education system. It felt like I was just another cog in the machine, forced to fit into a system that didn't suit me. I was passionate about tech, marketing, and building things from scratch, but none of my professors seemed to understand. I spent more time researching side hustles and entrepreneurial stories than listening to lectures. The idea of building something of my own constantly haunted me. One day, I decided to take the plunge. I quit school, packed my bags, and moved back in with my parents. It felt like the ultimate failure, but deep down, I knew it was a step towards something better. My parents, of course, were disappointed. They thought I was making a mistake. They wanted me to finish school, get a degree, and find a safe, stable job. But that wasn't my dream. I told myself that if I was going to fail, I'd rather fail on my own terms. I spent the next few months in my room, poring over YouTube tutorials, reading books, and researching every business model I could think of. It was overwhelming, but I felt energized by the idea of building something that could change my life. I didn't have a lot of money, so I had to be smart about where I invested my time and resources. After a lot of trial and error, I decided to start an e-commerce business. Specifically, I chose dropshipping. It seemed like the lowest barrier to entry for someone who had no money to invest in inventory. At first, things were slow. I didn't know what I was doing. I set up a Shopify store, created a few basic product listings, and launched a Facebook ad campaign. I didn't have a solid marketing strategy, nor did I understand the nuances of targeting. To be honest, I didn't even have a real product. I was drop-shipping products from suppliers in China with a hefty markup, hoping to make a profit off the difference. It was the classic throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks approach. And of course, nothing stuck. For the first few months, I barely made any sales. It was demoralizing. I watched countless YouTube videos, read countless blog posts, and even bought online courses. Everyone told me that success in e-commerce wasn't about working harder. It was about working smarter. So, I started tweaking my ads, redesigning my website, and experimenting with different products. I tried to convince myself that failure was just part of the process. But it wasn't all bad. During these early failures, I learned something important. The process is everything. I learned that in business, there is no such thing as overnight success. The path to success is paved with mistakes, but those mistakes are lessons in disguise. Each failed ad campaign, each product that didn't sell, was an opportunity to refine my approach. Fast forward to late 2018. By this time, I had finally hit my stride. I had learned the ins and outs of Facebook ads, product research, and customer retention. I also understood the importance of branding. My store didn't look like every other generic dropshipping website anymore. I had invested time in designing a unique, polished website that reflected my brand's personality. I started to create a story around my products, something that resonated with my audience. Then, in early 2019, I hit a breakthrough. One of my products, a set of eco-friendly kitchen gadgets, started to gain traction. I had done extensive research on eco-conscious consumerism, and I realized that the trend was picking up steam. I focused my ads on sustainability, and the response was immediate. Sales exploded. For the first time, I started seeing consistent profits. It wasn't just a one-time spike, it was sustainable. But even when things started to click, I faced new challenges. With increased sales came increased customer service demands. I had to hire a virtual assistant to help with customer inquiries, returns, and fulfillment. I also needed to find a more reliable supplier, as some of my original suppliers were inconsistent with shipping times and product quality. This part of the journey was exhausting. I was managing ads, customer service, inventory, and marketing all at once. There were days when I thought I couldn't handle it anymore. But I couldn't quit, not after coming this far. By mid-2019, my store was generating a solid income. I was able to quit my part-time job and focus on the business full-time. It felt surreal. It wasn't just about the money. It was the realization that I had built something from scratch. I had created a business that provided value to people. That, to me, was worth more than anything else. But success didn't mean everything was perfect. In 2020, when the pandemic hit, e-commerce was booming. But so was the competition. Everyone and their dog seemed to be starting a dropshipping store. It was harder to stand out. I had to adapt quickly, improve my marketing strategies, and invest more in customer loyalty. I also expanded my product offerings to cater to a broader market. The challenge was no longer getting customers, it was keeping them. I started offering promotions, loyalty discounts, and personalized marketing. I also began building an email list and launching campaigns that would nurture those relationships. I realized that e-commerce wasn't just about getting people to buy once. It was about creating a long-term relationship with them. By 2021, my business was profitable enough to expand. I hired more employees, launched a second store, and diversified into new markets. I still didn't have a degree, and I was still learning every single day. But what I had gained, through trial, error, and persistence, was invaluable. I had created a life for myself that I could be proud of. Today, I still face challenges. The market is constantly changing, and I'm always adapting. But I no longer feel like I'm treading water. I feel like I'm building something sustainable, something that can weather any storm. And, most importantly, I feel like I'm in control of my own future. The lessons I've learned along the way, about resilience, creativity, and never giving up, are what make this journey worthwhile. So, to anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, I say this: don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't expect it to be easy. Expect to fail, but expect to learn even more. Take the risk, do the work, and one day, you'll look back and realize that all the struggle was worth it. You got this. I never thought I'd become an entrepreneur. Growing up, I was always told that the key to a good life was a stable job, working hard, and doing what you were told. My parents always talked about the importance of a secure future, so my path seemed clear: get good grades, graduate, get a job in a respectable company, and live a comfortable life. Simple enough, right? I followed that script to a T. I went to college, got a degree in business, and landed a job at a well-known tech company. I was earning a decent salary, had benefits, and I was able to pay my bills without too much stress. For a while, everything seemed great. But after a few years, I started feeling an itch I couldn't ignore. I was good at my job, but I wasn't passionate about it. My days felt repetitive, and I was constantly watching the clock, waiting for the workday to end. The sense of fulfillment I thought I would get from climbing the corporate ladder was non-existent. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something more, something bigger. One day, I stumbled across a video about side hustles and entrepreneurship. The idea of building something from the ground up, of being my own boss, of having the freedom to make my own decisions, it was like a light bulb went off. I spent the next few weeks researching different business models, watching YouTube tutorials, reading success stories. It felt like a world I had never imagined before, and I was hooked. But there was one big problem. I didn't have any idea what kind of business I wanted to start. I was overwhelmed by the number of possibilities. Dropshipping, affiliate marketing, creating a digital product. There were too many options, and I had no clue where to begin. I started doing small things in my spare time, setting up a few e-commerce sites, running small ad campaigns, testing products, but nothing seemed to work. I was sinking money into ads, products, and courses that promised to change my life, but nothing was clicking. My bank account was getting lower, and my self-confidence was starting to shrink. I almost gave up multiple times, but I realized that failure was part of the process. If I wanted to build something real, I had to get used to the idea of failure and keep going. So, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of blindly following trends or jumping into random business ideas, I decided to focus on something I already knew: technology. I had spent years working in the tech industry, and during that time, I had developed a deep understanding of what worked and what didn't. I realized that my knowledge could be valuable, and I could create a product that filled a gap in the market. I wasn't sure exactly what that product would be yet, but I started brainstorming. One evening, while struggling to fix a technical issue on my own website, it hit me: why not build a tool that could help small business owners like myself? So many small businesses struggled with automating tasks, managing customer data, and staying on top of marketing. I had the skills to solve those problems, and I believed I could create something useful. That was the moment I decided to build a SaaS, software as a service, business. It wasn't going to be easy, but it felt right. I spent months working on a prototype, often working late into the night after my 9-to-5 job. There were times when I wanted to quit, especially when I was stuck on technical issues or when my code wouldn't run the way I wanted it to. But I kept pushing forward, knowing that success was only possible if I kept going. In the beginning, I didn't know how to market my product. I didn't have a huge network, and I didn't have the capital to run expensive ads. So, I did what I could with what I had. I started blogging, writing articles about common pain points small business owners had, and how my software could help solve those issues. Slowly but surely, I began attracting small audiences. I also reached out to a few small business owners I knew personally, offering them free trials of the software in exchange for feedback. Some said it wasn't quite what they were looking for, but others loved it. I used their feedback to improve the product, making small tweaks here and there, and soon enough, I started getting a few paying customers. It wasn't a lot, but it was a start. That's when things began to snowball. As my product gained traction, I started to get more and more referrals. I reinvested every dollar I made into improving the software, adding new features, and refining my marketing efforts. I launched a more robust version of the product and began offering webinars, online tutorials, and more content that educated potential customers on how they could use the software to grow their businesses. By the end of 2018, my little side project was making enough money that I could finally quit my 9-to-5 job. I didn't make that decision lightly, but by then, I had built a solid customer base, and the business was growing steadily. I hired my first employee, a developer who could help me scale the product. With the added help, we started making significant improvements, and the business began to grow even faster. 2019 was a game changer. We signed on more clients, expanded the software to support different industries, and grew our team. We were able to hire more developers, marketers, and support staff. We started getting media attention, and our software was featured in a few tech publications. We were no longer just a small business. We were becoming a legitimate player in the market. However, It wasn't all smooth sailing. Like any business, we faced challenges. We had some tough competitors, and our growth slowed at times. There were days when I wondered if we'd ever reach the next level. But I kept reminding myself that the road to success was never linear. By 2020, my SaaS business was generating over $500,000 in annual revenue. I couldn't believe it. From being a guy stuck in a dead-end job to becoming the founder of a successful business, everything had changed. I felt like I had finally achieved the freedom I had been craving. But, as I learned, success didn't end there. I realized that scaling the business, managing a growing team, and staying competitive in a fast-paced industry was a constant challenge. The work never stopped, but now I had the knowledge and experience to navigate those challenges. Looking back, it wasn't an easy journey. It took years of hard work, failure, and persistence. There were times when I wanted to quit, but every small success fueled me to keep going. I had created something real, and even though it was harder than I ever imagined, I wouldn't trade it for anything. If I could offer any advice to anyone starting their entrepreneurial journey, it would be this: don't expect instant success. The road is long, and it's going to be filled with setbacks. But if you have the determination to keep going, learn from your mistakes, and adapt along the way, you will eventually find success. Stay focused, stay resilient, and trust the process. And who knows? One day, you might be telling your story, just like I am now. I was never the kind of person who believed in overnight success or the idea that wealth could come without a lot of struggle. But the story I'm about to share is one that made me question everything I thought I knew about entrepreneurship. It all started with a single mistake. It was 2015 when I first had the idea for what would later become my business. I had recently graduated from university with a degree in marketing. Like most new graduates, I was optimistic but unsure about how to enter the job market. I tried my luck applying for a bunch of marketing jobs, but every time I got an interview, I felt this underlying sense of dread. I was qualified on paper, but something about the corporate world didn't sit well with me. One afternoon, after another frustrating interview rejection, I decided to take a break. I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post from a former classmate. She had started her own business, selling custom t-shirts with unique, hand-drawn designs. Her page was filled with pictures of her shirts, each design more creative than the last. Her brand looked polished, professional, and most importantly, she seemed happy. I don't know what it was about that moment, but something clicked in my mind. If she could do it, why couldn't I? I had an entrepreneurial itch, but up until then, I'd never had the courage to scratch it. At first, I thought I would just dip my toes into the world of business, maybe try to make a little extra cash on the side. I began researching different industries and product ideas. Then, I made a mistake that would change everything. One day, while I was doing some online research, I came across a company that sold unique phone accessories, things like custom-designed phone cases, pop sockets, and charging cables. They were selling these items for a pretty hefty markup, and their social media accounts had thousands of followers. At that moment, I was blinded by the success of their online presence. I figured that if they could do it, I could too. So, I bought a bulk order of custom phone accessories and set up an online store to sell them. To say I didn't do my research would be an understatement. I had no understanding of the intricacies of product sourcing, market demand, or e-commerce marketing. I jumped in headfirst, thinking that the products would just sell themselves. I built a flashy website, loaded it up with inventory, and hit launch. But no sales came. No one was visiting my site, and the little traffic I did get didn't convert into actual customers. For months, I struggled. I was burning through cash on paid ads and influencer partnerships, none of which led to any significant sales. I was starting to feel like I'd made the worst decision of my life. What was supposed to be a side hustle turned into an expensive lesson in failure. I was losing money faster than I could keep track, and the more I invested in ads, the more discouraged I became. Then, in one of my many sleepless nights spent staring at my computer screen, I stumbled upon a blog post about the importance of finding the right niche for your business. It clicked. I had been trying to sell generic products in an oversaturated market. I had no unique value proposition. My store was just another copy of thousands of others out there. It was a brutal realization, but it also felt like the breakthrough I needed. The very next day, I closed the store and refunded every single order I had placed. It was embarrassing to admit, but I had failed, and that failure forced me to reframe my approach. I realized that if I was going to build something successful, I needed to be different, to cater to a specific group of people who would find my product valuable, not just anyone with a phone. I began to study niche markets. I thought about the things I loved: gaming, tech gadgets, and quirky pop culture references. I knew there was a passionate community of people who shared those interests, and I wanted to create something they would be excited to buy. I started creating designs that combined all those elements, and I launched a new e-commerce store focused on custom tech accessories for gamers. This time, I approached things differently. I spent weeks building a community around my brand, engaging with potential customers on Reddit and Instagram. I joined gaming forums, made connections with influencers in the gaming space, and started getting feedback from people who would actually use my products. I made sure to keep the designs fresh and aligned with the latest trends in gaming. It wasn't long before I started seeing a trickle of sales, and then, gradually, that trickle turned into a steady flow. I still remember the first day I made my first sale. I was working a part-time job at the time, so when the notification popped up on my phone, I almost dropped it. I couldn't believe it. Someone, somewhere, had spent their hard-earned money on something I created. It was exhilarating. Over the next few months, the orders kept coming in. My sales grew steadily, and with each sale, I felt more and more confident. The real breakthrough came when a well-known gaming YouTuber featured my product in one of his videos. That single mention sent my website traffic through the roof. I went from making a handful of sales a day to hundreds in a matter of days. I had my first viral moment. It felt surreal, and for the first time in a long time, I truly believed I was onto something. The next few years were a whirlwind. I scaled the business by adding more product lines, optimizing my website, and collaborating with influencers in the gaming community. I also expanded into other niches, like sports fans and tech enthusiasts, creating custom accessories for those groups as well. The more specific I got with my product offerings, the more loyal my customer base became. By 2018, I was able to quit my part-time job and work on my business full-time. My revenue had grown exponentially, and what started as a side hustle had become a thriving business. I went from struggling to pay my bills to running a six-figure operation. But the journey didn't end there. Looking back, I can trace my success to that single moment when I admitted that I had made a mistake. It wasn't easy to close my first store and walk away from all the money I'd already invested, but that decision taught me the importance of finding the right niche and building a brand that truly resonated with my audience. Now, in 2025, my business has grown even more. I've expanded into international markets, partnered with large retailers, and even developed my own line of exclusive products. I still have my struggles. Every entrepreneur does, but I'm proud of how far I've come. The key takeaway here is that failure isn't the end. It's just part of the process. I could have given up after my first failed business, but instead, I learned from my mistakes, adapted, and eventually found success. If you're out there trying to build something, don't be afraid to fail. In fact, embrace it. Sometimes, it's the mistakes that lead to the most rewarding breakthroughs. I was 28, working a 9-to-5 job that I hated. I had a college degree, a decent job at a well-known company, and all the things I was told I needed to be happy: health benefits, paid vacation, a steady paycheck. Everyone around me seemed content with their lives, so why wasn't I? It wasn't that my job was particularly awful, but there was always this nagging feeling that I was meant to do more. I spent my days sitting in meetings, solving problems I didn't care about, and getting praised for work that I knew wouldn't move the needle in the grand scheme of things. I would look around the office and see the older folks who had been there for decades, climbing the corporate ladder, and I'd wonder, is this all there is? I started reading books about entrepreneurship in my free time, watching videos on how people had built their own companies from scratch. The stories were inspiring, but they also scared me. I would hear about people quitting their jobs and betting everything on a business idea, and I thought, I could never do that. What if I fail? What if it doesn't work out? The risk was terrifying, but the idea of living an entire life without pursuing my passion seemed worse. I was stuck. I felt paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. But then, everything changed one night when I stumbled across a Reddit post. It was from a guy who had started a small business, and the post ended with him saying something that really stuck with me. If you don't try, you'll never know what could have been. That line lingered in my mind for days. What did I have to lose? I wasn't happy in my job, and the worst that could happen was I'd end up right where I started, but at least I'd know I gave it a shot. I spent the next few months researching ideas. I knew I didn't want to go the traditional route of opening a restaurant or selling physical products. I wanted to create something that could scale, something that would allow me to work from anywhere. After much brainstorming, I landed on the idea of creating a SaaS, software as a service, product for small businesses. I had always been interested in technology, and I saw a major gap in the market. Small businesses often struggled with keeping track of customers, managing inventory, and handling marketing, something I knew I could solve with the right software. But there was one problem: I didn't know how to code. This is where things got tricky. I wasn't a programmer, but I was determined. I decided to teach myself. I spent countless hours on platforms like Udemy and Codecademy. I struggled through the initial stages, making countless mistakes, but eventually, I was able to piece together the basics of a product. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't the most elegant solution, but it worked. Next came the terrifying part: launching. I spent months developing the product in my free time while still working my full-time job. I knew that if I wanted this to work, I needed to give it my all. I started putting together a simple website, creating landing pages, and writing blog posts about the problems small businesses face and how my product could help solve them. I didn't have much of a budget for marketing, so I relied heavily on organic methods. I joined small business forums, engaged with people on social media, and posted on Reddit about the struggles of running a business and how I was working on a solution. To my surprise, people started showing interest. They didn't know who I was or what my product was, but they were willing to give it a shot. I offered free trials, and the first few customers came in. I was beyond excited. The feedback was mixed. Some loved it, others had issues. But I took every piece of feedback seriously, and over time, I improved the product. I learned the importance of listening to customers and pivoting when necessary. Each new customer gave me more confidence that I was on the right track. But just when I thought things were starting to pick up, my full-time job started becoming unbearable. I was working late into the night on my business, and it was affecting my energy and focus at work. I had to make a choice: the secure job with a steady paycheck or the risky entrepreneurial journey with no guarantees. I had already saved up enough money to live for a few months without a salary, so I took the plunge and quit my job. The next few months were the hardest of my life. I worked day and night to improve the product, market it better, and handle customer support. There were moments when I thought about quitting, when I felt like I was hitting a wall and nothing was moving. But every time I had a breakthrough, it kept me going. I started getting more paying customers, and then a few high-profile companies reached out for a demo. I couldn't believe it. Was this really happening? In the first year of being a full-time entrepreneur, my revenue hit $100,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than I had ever made in my corporate job. I was finally doing something I was passionate about, and it was working. I hired my first employee, a developer who could help scale the product. With their help, we were able to add more features and refine the user experience. In the second year, things really started to take off. Word of mouth spread, and we started getting more traffic to our site. We were featured in a few tech blogs, which gave us a huge boost. By the end of that year, our revenue had doubled, and I was finally able to pay myself a decent salary. I even started looking into expanding the business internationally, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. As the business grew, so did the challenges. I had to hire more people, handle cash flow, and deal with the complexities of scaling. I had to learn a lot about management, marketing, and operations, skills that I hadn't been taught in school or at my previous job. But every day felt like a new adventure, and I loved the challenge. Now, 3 years later, I'm the CEO of a company that employs a small team of passionate individuals. We've been featured in major publications, and our product is used by thousands of small businesses worldwide. I've learned that success in business isn't about having the perfect idea from the start, but about staying resilient and learning from your mistakes. You don't need to have all the answers at the beginning, but you do need to take the first step. The rest will come. Looking back, I'm grateful for the leap of faith I took. I'm living the life I always dreamed of, but it hasn't been easy. The key is to keep going even when it seems like things aren't working. Keep pushing, keep learning, and don't be afraid to fail. If you don't try, you'll never know what could have been. I was 22, fresh out of college, with a degree in business administration and a head full of dreams. I had no idea what I wanted to do exactly, but I knew I wanted to own something. I grew up watching my parents work their asses off, saving every penny and hustling just to make ends meet. I wanted more. I didn't want to struggle. I wanted to create something that could stand on its own. But there was one problem: I didn't have a clue where to start. I spent weeks trying to come up with ideas, browsing the internet for inspiration. Should I open a restaurant? Maybe a tech company? I had no experience in either of those areas, but I felt like I could learn. That's when the idea hit me one night while scrolling through social media. I saw an ad for a phone case company. The ad was flashy, with tons of colors and slogans like "Protect your phone with style." It was simple, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized. Phone cases were everywhere, but none of them stood out. I didn't know much about the phone accessory market, but I knew one thing for sure. People were obsessed with their phones, and they were willing to spend money to protect them in style. I decided then and there to start my own phone case business. The only problem was I didn't have a single cent to my name. My parents couldn't help me, and I didn't want to go into debt right out of the gate. So, I did what any desperate entrepreneur would do. I started small. I spent every free minute learning about e-commerce, drop shipping, and how to market a product. I didn't know anything about design, but I knew I could find people who did. I scoured online forums and freelancing sites for graphic designers willing to work on the cheap. After some time, I came up with a few simple designs, nothing revolutionary, but I figured I could build on them later. The next hurdle was finding a supplier. I stumbled across a site called AliExpress, where you could source products directly from manufacturers in China. The prices were dirt cheap, but the quality was hit or miss. I ordered a few samples, and when they finally arrived, I was horrified. The designs were poor, the quality was subpar, and I couldn't imagine anyone actually buying them. But I was stubborn. I refused to give up. After tweaking the designs a bit and getting the quality up to a level that I was at least somewhat satisfied with, I launched my first website. It was basic. The layout was clunky, the product images were dark and unprofessional, and the copy was awkward. But I had one thing going for me: persistence. I spent every waking moment promoting my site. I posted on Instagram, joined Facebook groups, and tried everything I could think of to get traffic to my site. I remember spending hours learning about SEO, search engine optimization, and I spent days perfecting my product descriptions to make them as engaging as possible. At first, nothing happened. Weeks passed without a single sale. I was demoralized. The dream I had was starting to feel like a pipe dream. But I refused to give up. I started running Facebook ads. I experimented with different targeting options, trying to find the right audience. I tried discount codes, limited time offers, and influencer marketing, but nothing seemed to click. The ads were burning through my small budget, and the sales just weren't coming in. Then one day, I got an email from a random person. They had bought one of my cases and were asking for a refund. I was devastated. This was the first email I'd gotten from a customer, and it was a complaint. I replied, apologizing profusely and offering to give them a full refund, even though I couldn't really afford to do that at the time. I asked for feedback, trying to understand what went wrong. To my surprise, the customer responded with a detailed email explaining that they didn't like the case because it didn't fit their phone perfectly. They mentioned that the design was nice, but the fit was loose and didn't feel like it would protect the phone as promised. It was a tough pill to swallow, but it was the wake-up call I needed. I realized that I had been so focused on getting the product out the door and making sales that I hadn't properly tested the products or considered the actual user experience. I had to improve my designs, and I needed to do it fast. I spent the next few months working with my supplier to make adjustments to the cases. I did more testing, reached out to influencers for honest feedback, and reworked the website. I began to focus on customer satisfaction over quick profits. Slowly but surely, things started to improve. I refined my product line, adding more variations and improving the quality. My ads were starting to get better results, and I had my first real success when a small influencer posted about my cases. Sales began to trickle in, then slowly grew. Every sale felt like a mini victory. I couldn't believe people were actually buying my cases. It was a rush. But the real turning point came when I reached out to a larger influencer with a bigger following. I offered them a free case in exchange for a review. They posted about it, and overnight, my sales exploded. I had found the golden formula. The influencer's endorsement gave me the social proof I needed to build credibility, and with each new sale, I refined my marketing strategy even more. I started creating custom phone cases for niche audiences, like gaming enthusiasts and pet lovers. The key was understanding the customer's needs and tailoring the product to fit their lifestyle. By the time I was 24, my little phone case business was making consistent 5-figure months. I had expanded my product line to include accessories like chargers and wireless earbuds, and I had hired a small team to help with customer service and fulfillment. My website, once a clunky mess, was now a smooth, professional platform that made shopping an enjoyable experience. I finally felt like I had a real business on my hands. Fast forward to today, and I've been running my phone accessory company for over 5 years. We've grown from a tiny operation in my bedroom to a fully fledged business with a warehouse and a loyal customer base. We've even launched our own custom line of phones, which is still in its infancy but has already shown promise. I've been able to quit my day job and focus entirely on my business, and while the road hasn't been easy, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Looking back, I realized that all the failures, the late nights, the moments of doubt, and the hundreds of mistakes were part of the process. They were the necessary stepping stones to get to where I am today. I learned that entrepreneurship isn't about finding the perfect idea right away. It's about failing, learning, and adapting. It's about not giving up when things get tough and always striving to improve. Starting my business was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also the most rewarding. And if I can do it, so can anyone else. Just don't be afraid to fail, because that's where the magic happens. It was around 2 a.m. when I decided I had to quit my 9 to 5. The late-night anxiety was becoming unbearable. I was in a job I hated, surrounded by people who seemed content with their lives while I felt like I was slowly suffocating. I wasn't miserable in the conventional sense. There was no toxic environment or boss from hell, but I just didn't feel alive anymore. The work was monotonous, and the small wins didn't matter. Sure, I got paid, had health benefits, and weekends off, but the void that I felt every morning when I sat at my desk was unbearable. The thought of doing this for another 30 years made me physically sick. I had always known I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I had never been satisfied with the idea of being comfortable. I wanted more, and I knew that taking risks was the only way I'd find out what I was truly capable of. The problem? I had no idea where to start. I had an idea here and there, but nothing that screamed, "This is it." That night, something in me snapped. I had spent weeks, months even, reading stories about people who had turned their passions into businesses. I followed countless entrepreneurial blogs, watched YouTube videos, and listened to podcasts of people who had succeeded in starting their own companies. The stories were inspiring, but they also triggered something deep in me, the fear of regret. The fear that I would spend the next decade of my life doing the same thing and never know what it could have been like if I had just tried. The thing that pushed me over the edge was a comment I saw on a Reddit thread. Someone had posted about quitting their job to start their business, and another user responded with something that hit me like a ton of bricks. If you don't try, you'll never know. Those words haunted me for weeks. I didn't want to wake up when I was 50 wishing I had taken the plunge. I needed to make a move, no matter how scared I was. I didn't have a plan at that moment. I didn't even have an idea of what I wanted to do. But I knew that I couldn't keep working in the same job. So, I decided to take a risk. I started researching. I wanted something scalable, something I could start without needing tons of initial investment. I wasn't interested in opening a restaurant or a retail store, too much overhead. I was looking for something that I could build online. I'd always been interested in the tech space, particularly SaaS, software as a service. Small businesses, especially local ones, often didn't have the resources to manage their operations effectively. Whether it was customer relationship management, invoicing, or project tracking, there was a gap in the market. So, I started researching SaaS products and how they were built. Here's the problem. I didn't know how to code. That could have been the end of the story, right? But somehow, I convinced myself that it didn't have to be. I didn't need to be a programmer to build a software product. What I needed was determination and the willingness to learn. So, I began taking coding courses online. I spent every night after work and most weekends studying coding languages. HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I built tiny little projects, learning one line of code at a time. It wasn't easy. At first, it felt like trying to learn a foreign language. But with every line of code I wrote, I felt more confident. I knew this wasn't going to happen overnight, but I was determined. I kept pushing through, even when it felt like I would never be able to build something that actually worked. Months passed, and I finally had something that I could call an MVP, minimum viable product. It wasn't perfect, and I knew it wouldn't be perfect, but it was something. I wasn't sure if people would even like it, but I had to give it a shot. The next step was terrifying, putting it out there. I didn't have a large following, and my network wasn't filled with potential customers. But I knew that the only way to see if this would work was to put it in front of real users. So, I started by posting on Reddit, and small business and startup subreddits. I explained what I was building and offered free trials to anyone willing to try it out. It wasn't glamorous. I wasn't an expert, and I had no real marketing budget. But what I had was the willingness to fail and learn from it. Surprisingly, people started signing up. The feedback wasn't great, but it wasn't awful either. They liked the concept but had plenty of suggestions for improvement. I listened to everything, fixed what I could, and kept improving the product based on user input. I was juggling this with my full-time job, and it was exhausting. There were nights when I barely slept, working into the early hours of the morning, refining the product, tweaking the design, and responding to users. Then came the next major decision. I knew that to take this seriously, I would have to quit my job. I wasn't making enough money yet to replace my income, but I had saved up enough to survive for a few months. The fear was real. What if I failed? What if this didn't work? But deep down, I knew that the real failure would be not trying at all. So, I quit. The first few months were rough. I had no real marketing experience, so I had to learn that too. I read blogs, took online courses, and did whatever I could to get the word out. Slowly, my user base started to grow. I went from a handful of users to hundreds. I was getting feedback, making improvements, and working with early adopters to make the product better. Then, something incredible happened. A well-known small business blog picked up a post I wrote about the struggles of starting a business and featured my product. Overnight, my traffic exploded. I went from a few hundred users to a few thousand. People were actually paying for the product. I had built something people wanted. The first year, I made $50,000 in revenue. It wasn't a fortune, but it was proof that this could work. Fast forward 2 years. My product has evolved into a platform that serves thousands of small businesses around the world. I have a small team of developers and marketers who help scale the product. We've been featured in multiple tech publications, and revenue is growing steadily. I'm not a millionaire yet, but I've built a business that gives me freedom and fulfillment. If I had let fear rule my decisions, I would still be at that job I hated. Instead, I took a leap of faith, and while the road hasn't been easy, it's been worth it. I'm living the life I've always dreamed of, not just financially, but in terms of fulfillment. To anyone who's afraid to take the leap, I say this: if you don't try, you'll never know what could have been. Don't let fear hold you back. The worst thing you can do is regret not trying. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I grew up in a small town where the idea of becoming an entrepreneur was as far-fetched as becoming a rock star. My parents were both teachers, and while they loved their jobs, they often spoke about the financial struggles they faced. Despite having a stable income, they never seemed to get ahead, always stressing over bills and the rising cost of everyday life. My dad, in particular, was passionate about teaching, but I could see the wear and tear it took on him. He never had time for himself, and his dreams of traveling the world or starting a side project were always pushed aside. I knew from a young age that I didn't want to live that same life. I wanted something different, something more. But at that point, I wasn't sure what that looked like. I had heard people talk about starting businesses, but it seemed like a distant, impossible dream. It wasn't until I was in high school that a seed was planted in my mind. I was introduced to the idea of passive income, earning money while doing nothing. It seemed too good to be true, but the more I researched, the more I realized that it wasn't just a pipe dream. There were real ways to make money, and they didn't all involve working 40-plus hours a week for a salary that barely covered your expenses. I started by reading books on personal finance and entrepreneurship. I spent hours every day watching YouTube videos, listening to podcasts, and absorbing as much information as I could. I didn't have any money to invest, but I knew that knowledge was something I could invest in. I learned about dropshipping, affiliate marketing, digital products, and real estate. The more I learned, the more I felt like I had a chance to break free from the traditional career path. When I graduated from high school, I didn't go to college. Instead, I took the money my parents had saved for me to attend university and invested it into my first business venture, an online store selling fitness equipment. I knew it wasn't a unique idea, but I thought if I could offer products that were high quality at a competitive price, I might be able to carve out a small niche for myself. At first, everything went wrong. I couldn't get the website to work properly, and when I finally did, the traffic was almost non-existent. I spent hours reading through forums, reaching out to other entrepreneurs, and learning how to improve my marketing strategy. I experimented with Facebook ads, Instagram promotions, and influencer partnerships, but nothing seemed to click. After months of struggle, I was about to give up. I had barely sold enough to cover my initial investment, let alone make a profit. It felt like all my dreams were falling apart. That's when I stumbled upon a blog post about SEO, search engine optimization. I'd heard the term before, but never understood its importance. It seemed complicated, and I didn't have a tech background, but I decided to give it a shot. I spent weeks learning how to optimize my website so that it would rank higher on Google. Slowly but surely, I started to see results. Over the next 6 months, my website traffic grew, and so did my sales. I went from barely scraping by to making a decent income. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to keep me going. I reinvested every penny back into the business, expanding my product offerings and improving my marketing. Eventually, I was able to scale up and hire a small team to handle customer service and shipping, allowing me to focus on growing the business further. By the time I turned 21, I had fully transitioned from my small online store into a full-fledged e-commerce company. I was making 6 figures a year, and while I didn't have the luxury of being completely hands-off, I was far ahead of where I'd ever imagined myself at that age. But it didn't stop there. The turning point came when I realized that in order to truly scale my business, I had to think beyond selling physical products. I began researching digital products and services that could provide value to my customers while creating additional revenue streams. That's when I came up with the idea of creating online courses to teach others how to start and run their own e-commerce businesses. I started by putting together a simple course, sharing the lessons I had learned the hard way. It wasn't fancy, just me on a camera, talking about my experiences and offering actionable tips. I marketed it through my existing audience, and the response was overwhelming. People actually wanted to pay for my knowledge. That's when I realized the true potential of what I had built. I began offering more courses, creating a membership site, and even launching a podcast where I interviewed other successful entrepreneurs. Over time, my business diversified, and I began making money from multiple sources: e-commerce, online education, consulting, and affiliate marketing. It was no longer just about selling products. It was about building a brand and a community. Fast forward to today, and I'm running a multi-million-dollar business with a team of over 30 people. I've traveled the world, spoken at conferences, and even been featured in magazines. My parents, who were once skeptical of my decision to skip college, are now my biggest supporters. They've seen firsthand how hard I worked, and they've come to realize that there are many paths to success. I won't pretend that it was easy. There were countless sleepless nights, moments of doubt, and financial struggles along the way. But every failure was a lesson, and every setback was an opportunity to learn and grow. I've learned that entrepreneurship isn't about having a great idea. It's about perseverance, adaptability, and an unwavering belief in your ability to figure things out. Looking back, I never could have imagined how far I'd come. I went from being a kid in a small town with big dreams to building a thriving business and a life that I'm truly proud of. And the best part is that I'm just getting started. I still have so much to learn, and I'm always looking for new ways to innovate and grow. If there's one thing I've learned on this journey, it's that success doesn't come overnight. It takes time, effort, and an unwavering commitment to your vision. But if you're willing to put in the work, the rewards can be life-changing. And for me, the best part isn't the money or the recognition. It's the freedom to live life on my own terms. So if you're out there, wondering if it's possible to build something from nothing, my answer is yes. Keep learning, keep pushing, and never give up. You might be closer than you think. I always knew that starting a business was going to be tough, but nothing could have prepared me for how difficult it would truly be. My story starts not with a sudden idea, but with a series of events that came together slowly, almost like fate nudging me toward entrepreneurship. It all began with a problem I noticed while working as a digital marketer. Every day, I worked with small businesses, helping them get their name out there online. One common problem that I saw across the board was the lack of proper branding. Many small businesses were trying to market themselves without any clear identity, which made it hard for them to stand out. I couldn't shake the thought that there was an opportunity in this problem. What if there was a way to help these small businesses build strong brands from the ground up? I knew I wasn't the first person to have this idea, but I also knew that I had the skills to make it work. I had spent years helping companies develop their online presence, so the idea of helping businesses with branding felt like a natural next step. The first thing I did was research. I spent months learning everything I could about branding, market positioning, and what small businesses truly needed. I even reached out to a few friends who owned small businesses and asked them about their struggles. The response was overwhelming. Most of them had either no brand at all or a weak one, and they didn't know where to start. After months of research, I finally decided to take the plunge and start my own branding agency. I didn't have a lot of money saved up, so I bootstrapped the whole thing. I spent hours creating a simple website, which I launched as soon as I felt it was decent enough. I was determined to make this work, but I was also very aware that I had no idea what I was doing. The only thing I had going for me was my passion and my drive to succeed. For the first few months, business was slow. I barely made enough money to cover the bills, and there were days when I questioned whether I had made a huge mistake. But I kept pushing forward. I reached out to more potential clients, offered free consultations, and even worked on several pro bono projects just to get my foot in the door. I didn't expect instant success, but I also wasn't willing to give up just yet. The turning point came when I landed a small local cafe as a client. They had no brand identity, and they wanted help creating one that would attract more customers. I was beyond excited, but also terrified. This was the first real project where I could prove my skills and, more importantly, prove to myself that I could actually do this. I worked tirelessly on their branding, from logo design to color scheme, messaging, and even the interior aesthetic of their cafe. I wanted everything to be perfect. When the rebranding was complete, the results were incredible. The cafe saw a significant increase in foot traffic, and customers began to engage with their brand in ways they hadn't before. They were receiving more positive reviews, and word of mouth spread quickly. It was a huge success, and it felt like everything had finally clicked into place. The cafe owner was thrilled and recommended me to several of his business friends. From there, business started to pick up. I gained more clients, and my reputation grew. But even as the business began to thrive, the challenges didn't stop. There were so many moments of doubt. Some months, I'd have a handful of clients, and other months, it seemed like the work had dried up completely. The inconsistencies were hard to handle, especially because I didn't have a huge financial cushion to rely on. There were times when I considered giving up, but I pushed through those moments by focusing on the long-term goal, building a business that would one day support not just me, but my growing team. A few years into my business, I decided to hire my first employee. It was a big step, but I knew that in order to scale, I needed help. Hiring the right person was crucial, and it took some time, but eventually, I brought on a talented designer who shared my vision. Having someone else to bounce ideas off of was a game changer. The two of us worked well together, and soon after, we expanded our team even further. As our agency grew, we started attracting bigger clients, including some well-known brands. It was surreal. The imposter syndrome was real, but I tried my best not to let it control me. The lessons I'd learned during the early days of struggling helped me navigate the challenges that came with bigger projects. I focused on quality, always, and maintained the same attention to detail that I had when I was working with small businesses. But even as the agency grew, the challenges didn't stop. I had to learn how to manage a team, handle client expectations, and stay ahead of the competition. The pressure was constant. The first few months of hiring staff were especially tough, as I had to figure out the best way to keep the team motivated and productive. I quickly realized that leadership was a skill I hadn't anticipated needing, but it was one I had to develop quickly. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was that not every client is a good fit. I took on clients because I needed the work, but there were times when I had to fire clients who were toxic or who didn't align with our values. It was hard at first, but it was a necessary step for the growth of my business. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far we've come. From those early, stressful months of bootstrapping a business, to now, running an agency with a team of talented individuals. The hard work, the sleepless nights, and the constant hustling paid off, but it didn't come without its challenges. There were plenty of moments when I felt like throwing in the towel, but I kept going because I knew that success doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey. If you're thinking of starting your own business, my advice is simple. Be prepared for the ups and downs, but don't give up. There will be moments when you question everything, but the key is to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Learn from your mistakes, surround yourself with people who support your vision, and don't be afraid to ask for help when you need it. Success is not guaranteed, but if you're willing to work hard and stay focused, you can build something meaningful. I've learned more about myself in the past few years than I ever thought possible. And though the road hasn't been easy, I wouldn't trade it for anything. I remember the exact moment I knew I had to quit my job. It wasn't some dramatic event or a life-changing epiphany. It was the 50th time I sat at my desk, feeling that gnawing sense of dread in my stomach. The type of feeling that only grows with each passing day. I'd been working in the corporate world for about 5 years. I had a nice title, a decent paycheck, and even a few promotions under my belt, but something was always missing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living someone else's dream, not my own. It all started after I read a book called The $100 Startup by Chris Gilbo. In the book, he talks about how anyone, with minimal startup capital, can create a business that offers value to others. The stories in it were inspiring, and for the first time, I started thinking maybe I could build something too. I didn't have a big nest egg saved up or any kind of plan, but I had a burning desire to escape the corporate grind. I realized I had spent the past several years helping others build their dreams. When was I going to build my own? The idea for my business came to me unexpectedly. I had always been passionate about fitness, but it wasn't just about working out or losing weight. It was about mental health. I had used fitness as a way to deal with stress and anxiety for years, and I realized there was an underserved market for people who were looking for more than just physical transformation. I wanted to create a platform where people could not only find workout plans, but also get emotional and mental support, something that was rarely offered by gyms or fitness apps at the time. At the time, I had no real business experience. I didn't know how to code, design an app, or market a product. What I did have, however, was an idea that I believed in and a willingness to learn. I started researching online courses to teach myself about building apps and marketing. I started learning everything I could, from coding to branding to digital marketing. The first few months were rough. I would spend my evenings after work watching tutorials on YouTube, reading articles on Medium, and trying to absorb as much knowledge as I could. But after a while, I started feeling overwhelmed. I didn't know if I could actually make this work, but I wasn't going to give up. I had seen people start businesses with little more than a laptop and a dream. I had to keep pushing forward. Slowly, I began to piece things together. I had no money to hire developers, so I used simple tools to create a basic version of my app. It wasn't anything fancy, just a landing page with a few workout plans and some blog posts. But it was a start. The first major breakthrough came when I decided to start an Instagram account to promote my ideas. I didn't know anything about social media marketing at the time, but I saw it as a free way to start building an audience. I began posting daily content about fitness, mental health, and personal development. I started sharing my story, how fitness had helped me with anxiety and stress. Slowly but surely, people started following me. At first, it was just a few friends and family members, but then it started growing. I had to learn to engage with my followers, respond to comments, and provide value. I had no idea at the time that this would become one of the most important decisions in my business journey. The next few months were a blur. I was working full-time while also building my business. I spent every free moment I had working on my side project. I remember waking up early before work to write blog posts, working on my app during lunch breaks, and staying up late to answer Instagram messages. There were days when I felt like I was juggling 100 things at once. There were moments when I felt like I was about to burn out. But every time I had doubts, I reminded myself that I was building something bigger than just a side hustle. I was building a life I wanted to live. Eventually, I was able to launch my app. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. I had created a platform where people could sign up for fitness plans that were not only tailored to their physical goals, but also incorporated mental health strategies like mindfulness and meditation. I was no longer just selling a product. I was selling a lifestyle. But the real breakthrough came when I took the leap and quit my job. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. I had a decent salary and benefits, and leaving it all behind felt like a huge risk. But the longer I worked on my business, the more I realized that I couldn't give my all to both. One had to go. I'll never forget the day I handed in my resignation letter. I was shaking, both with fear and excitement. I knew it was a risk, but it was also the moment I took full control of my future. I wasn't leaving my job because I hated it. I was leaving because I believed in what I was building. That first year after quitting was tough. My business wasn't making nearly enough money to replace my full-time income. But I kept pushing, refining my app, experimenting with marketing strategies, and learning from my mistakes. I took on side gigs to help pay the bills while I worked on my business in every free moment I had. Slowly but surely, things started to improve. I got better at marketing. I started running Facebook ads. I expanded my content on Instagram and began to collaborate with influencers in the fitness and mental health space. My app began to grow, and so did my revenue. By year 2, I had fully replaced my corporate income. I was working for myself, building a business that aligned with my passions. The growth didn't stop there. My business continued to expand, and eventually, I was able to hire a small team to help me with the parts one wasn't good at. I now had the freedom to work on my business and grow it even further without being overwhelmed by all the details. Fast forward to today, and I've grown my fitness and mental health platform into a 6-figure business. I have over 10,000 active users, and we're expanding into corporate wellness programs. We've been featured in health magazines, and I'm constantly hearing from people who've had their lives changed by my app. But the best part? I'm no longer just an employee. I'm an entrepreneur who took a chance on themselves. I can now create the life I want to live, and I don't have to ask for permission. I never would have believed that I could go from a corporate desk job to running my own successful business, but now I know anything is possible with hard work and persistence. To anyone reading this who's still stuck in a job they hate, don't let fear control your decisions. If I can do it, so can you. You just need to take that first step. It won't be easy, but it'll be worth it. You have nothing to lose but the life you're not living. I started my business when I was 24 years old. I had just graduated from university, armed with a degree in business administration and an overwhelming desire to prove myself. I had a little money saved up from part-time jobs, but I wasn't exactly flush with cash. What I did have, however, was an idea. It all began when I was sitting at a coffee shop with some friends. We were talking about how hard it was to find quality, affordable fitness gear that didn't look like it came from a cheap knockoff factory. As someone who was into fitness, I found this frustrating. I wanted stylish gear that could take a beating, but it didn't exist, at least not at a price point that made sense for me and my peers. At first, I thought about just purchasing gear from various manufacturers and reselling it with a markup. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I could create something better, something that could stand out in the market. I knew how important it was for fitness gear to be durable and high quality, but I also knew that aesthetics mattered. People wanted to look good while working out, and there was a significant gap in the market for gear that didn't sacrifice style for substance. I wasn't an expert in apparel design, nor did I have a background in manufacturing, but I had an intense drive to figure it out. I started doing research. I reached out to people who were already in the business, asking questions about the best manufacturers, fabric types, and the logistics of creating a product from scratch. I watched endless YouTube tutorials on sewing and pattern making. I went to fabric stores, learning about materials, durability, and texture. I even learned about the supply chain and how shipping worked. After a few months of research, I was ready to launch. I found a small factory overseas that was willing to take on my designs and create a prototype. My first order was small, barely enough to fill a suitcase. I didn't want to risk too much, especially since I had no idea if anyone would even buy what I was creating. But I was determined. I designed a logo, built a basic website, and started creating social media accounts. I didn't have a huge following, so I began posting workout content and sneak peeks of the gear, hoping that the combination of aesthetics and functionality would capture the attention of others like me. A few months later, the gear finally arrived. It was time to launch. The first few days were slow. I barely made any sales. I wasn't discouraged, at least not entirely, but I knew I had to do something to get noticed. That's when I turned to social media influencers. I reached out to several fitness influencers, most of whom had a following of a few thousand people, asking if they'd be willing to try out my gear. I offered them a free set of apparel in exchange for a review. To my surprise, many of them agreed. I'll admit, I was nervous when the first reviews started coming in, but the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. People were commenting about the quality, the fit, and how different it was from other brands they had tried. After that, sales picked up. Slowly but surely, the brand started to gain traction. It wasn't an overnight success, but the momentum was building. I reinvested everything I earned into expanding the product line. I added new designs, different colors, and better materials. I started to improve the website, optimizing it for a better user experience and offering faster shipping options. As sales grew, I hired a small team to help with customer service, marketing, and order fulfillment. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Along the way, there were countless challenges. The first major issue I encountered was inventory. Early on, I didn't anticipate how quickly my products would sell, and I often found myself out of stock, unable to fulfill orders. Customers started to complain, and I quickly realized that this was a problem I needed to solve if I wanted to continue growing. I reached out to the manufacturer to discuss ordering larger quantities, but there were issues with minimum order quantities and lead times. The situation was stressful, and for a moment, I seriously considered giving up. But I remembered why I started this in the first place. I wanted to build something that I was proud of. I wasn't going to let a few setbacks stop me. I began diversifying my supply chain. I found multiple manufacturers that could handle different aspects of the production process. One would handle the apparel, another the packaging, and yet another the shipping. This allowed me to scale the business without putting all my eggs in one basket. Another issue I faced was marketing. At first, I relied solely on influencers to promote my brand. But as the business grew, I realized that I needed a more sustainable approach. I invested in paid ads on Facebook and Instagram, targeting people who had shown interest in fitness or workout apparel. I created compelling ads that focused not just on the product, but on the lifestyle it represented. My goal wasn't just to sell apparel. It was to sell confidence, strength, and empowerment. The next big breakthrough came when I started working with professional athletes. One of them, a well-known personal trainer with millions of followers, started wearing my gear during workouts and shared it on social media. That was the moment everything changed. Sales exploded overnight, and I saw my brand reach a whole new level of recognition. But growth also brought new challenges. As demand increased, I had to figure out how to keep up with customer service. I hired a customer support team and implemented a more efficient order management system to handle the increased volume. I also had to build a more robust fulfillment process, which meant finding a reliable logistics partner to help with shipping. By the time I turned 30, my brand was no longer a small startup. It was a recognized name in the fitness industry. The business was profitable, and I was able to hire a larger team and expand into international markets. I had taken something from a simple idea in a coffee shop to a full-fledged brand that people trusted and admired. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. The journey hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every sleepless night and every setback. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that perseverance is key. Success doesn't happen overnight, but if you stay focused, work hard, and embrace the challenges, you can build something amazing. I remember the first time I took a leap of faith. I had just quit my 9-to-5 job, the one that promised stability but never truly fulfilled me. At the time, I didn't even know what kind of business I wanted to start, but I knew one thing. I was tired of living someone else's dream. I wanted to build my own, no matter how hard it seemed. It all began in the fall of 2019. I was working in corporate marketing, grinding away in a cubicle, staring at a screen all day long. I was doing what I was supposed to do, climbing the ladder, hitting targets, going through the motions. But deep down, I felt like something was missing. My passion for the work had faded, and I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that I had more to offer the world. But here's the kicker. I didn't have any special skills or resources that most successful entrepreneurs have. I wasn't a tech genius, I didn't have a large network, and my savings were barely enough to pay the bills for the next couple of months. But I did have one thing, a relentless drive to change my life. In early 2020, after months of contemplation and sleepless nights, I decided to take the plunge. I left my job and started looking for ways to make money online. At first, I tried everything: dropshipping, affiliate marketing, selling digital products. But each one felt like I was just spinning my wheels. I was getting nowhere fast, and to be honest, it was frustrating as hell. The constant trial and error wore me down, and I started doubting myself. I thought maybe I wasn't cut out for this after all. But I didn't quit. Instead, I took a step back and evaluated everything I had learned. I started to notice a pattern. Every time I had a conversation with people, whether it was friends or strangers, they kept asking me for advice on topics I was already somewhat knowledgeable about. It wasn't anything extraordinary, just simple things like managing finances, career development, and navigating the early stages of entrepreneurship. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been trying to build businesses in industries that I didn't care about, just because they seemed like the right thing to do. But what if I could help others with the knowledge and skills I already had? What if I could create content around personal finance and entrepreneurship, things I was genuinely passionate about? With that thought, I started my blog and YouTube channel in late 2020. I remember the first time I hit publish on a post. My heart raced. It wasn't perfect, but I didn't care. I knew that if I waited for perfection, I'd never get started. I shared my journey, my failures, and the lessons I had learned along the way. And guess what? People started following me. At first, it was just a handful of friends and family, but slowly, others joined in. My inbox was flooded with messages from people who were in the same position I was, a job they hated, a passion they couldn't pursue, and a dream they were too afraid to chase. But here's where the real struggle began. I thought that just creating content would be enough to build an audience, but I was wrong. I spent countless hours learning about SEO, social media marketing, and how to drive traffic to my site. Some days, it felt like an uphill battle. I would spend hours creating content, only to see little to no engagement. The doubts crept back in. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this after all. But I kept going. I got better at understanding my audience and what they wanted. I refined my approach and started focusing on what worked. Slowly but surely, the numbers began to grow. I got my first sponsored partnership in 2021, a small deal that paid me just enough to cover my rent for the month. It wasn't much, but it was a sign that I was on the right path. I reinvested that money back into the business, hiring a designer for my website, paying for better equipment, and expanding my reach. By 2022, I had managed to turn my blog and YouTube channel into a legitimate business. I was making enough money to not only cover my bills, but also invest in new projects and products. I launched an online course to teach others how to start their own side hustles, and to my surprise, it sold out within the first week. I couldn't believe it. People actually valued the knowledge I was sharing. But just when I thought everything was going great, disaster struck. In mid-2022, I faced a massive personal crisis. A close family member fell seriously ill, and I had to step away from my business to focus on them. It was a devastating blow, both emotionally and financially. I had to put everything on hold, and my income took a major hit. For the first time in years, I felt like I was back at square one. But I didn't give up. I went back to basics. I reconnected with my audience, explained the situation, and shared my vulnerabilities. I had built my business on honesty and authenticity, so it felt only right to be transparent with my followers. To my surprise, the community rallied around me. They sent messages of support, donations, and encouragement. This experience reminded me that the relationships I had built with my audience were more important than any revenue stream. By the end of 2022, I was back on my feet. I had learned more than I ever expected about resilience and the power of community. In early 2023, I launched a new product line, customized financial planners, and it was an instant success. The response was overwhelming, and for the first time in my career, I felt truly in control of my future. Fast forward to today. I'm proud of how far I've come. I've been able to quit my day job, build a business that aligns with my values, and, most importantly, help others do the same. I'm not saying it's been easy, far from it. There have been sleepless nights, moments of self-doubt, and failures along the way. But with each obstacle, I grew stronger. I learned that success isn't about avoiding failure. It's about persevering through it. Now, I run a full-fledged business with a team of passionate individuals who share my vision. I get to wake up every day and do work that fulfills me, and I've had the privilege of helping hundreds of people start their own businesses. It hasn't been the smoothest journey, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. If I could give one piece of advice to anyone thinking about starting their own business, it would be this. Don't wait for everything to be perfect. Start now, learn as you go, and be willing to fail. It's the only way to truly grow. And if you're feeling stuck or overwhelmed, remember this. It's okay to take a break. Sometimes, stepping back for a moment is exactly what you need to get clarity and find your path forward. Trust the process, even when it feels impossible. I'm living proof that you don't need a perfect plan to start a business. All you need is a dream, determination, and the willingness to push through the tough times. I used to think entrepreneurship was only for people who had a crazy idea, millions in funding, or a burning desire to disrupt industries. That was before I quit my 9-to-5 and started my own business. I'm not a genius. I'm not someone with a unique background or connections in Silicon Valley. I'm just a regular person who saw a need, figured out how to meet it, and worked relentlessly until it worked. Here's my story. I'd always been the type of person who played it safe. After college, I landed a job as a project manager at a tech company. I liked it well enough: steady paychecks, benefits, and the comfort of knowing that I was always going to have work to do. I moved up in the company fairly quickly. Promotions, raises, and the occasional pat on the back were enough to keep me content for a while. But something was always gnawing at me. I was in my late 20s, and while my career seemed fine on paper, I was starting to feel stuck. I would wake up every day, go through the motions, and come home feeling like I'd just spent hours making someone else's dream a reality. The problem wasn't my job. It was my life. I had no real excitement or passion for the work I was doing, and I found myself thinking more and more about what else I could be doing. I'd always had an entrepreneurial itch, but I never thought I was cut out for it. What did I know about starting a business? What resources did I have? I was comfortable in my job, and the thought of leaving the stability of a paycheck was terrifying. So I stayed, and I kept getting more and more frustrated. Then, one night, I was scrolling through social media, as you do, and I came across an article about a woman who started a successful business with almost no capital. She was doing something she loved, and her story stuck with me. I thought, maybe this is something I could do, but I still didn't know where to start. A few weeks later, my friend Sarah came to visit. She had recently made the leap into freelancing, and as we talked over dinner, she mentioned something that stuck with me. She said, "You know, you're never going to be truly happy working for someone else. You're smart, driven, and you have so much to offer. You should go for it." I felt a spark of excitement and fear all at once. Could I really leave my job? Was I really capable of building something from the ground up? Could I handle the risk? I spent the next few weeks obsessively researching business ideas. I wanted something I could be passionate about, but I also needed something practical. After hours of brainstorming, I settled on an idea I hadn't even considered: a subscription box service for eco-friendly home goods. It seemed like the right mix of sustainability, convenience, and growing market demand. I figured if I could create a product that helped people live greener, I could build a community of customers who were equally passionate about the environment. I'll admit, I was naive about how much work it would take. I didn't have any experience with logistics, product sourcing, or customer service, but I was determined to make it work. I started by researching suppliers, creating a website, and putting together a business plan. At night, I stayed up late learning about marketing, SEO, and social media. I had no idea how long this would take, but I knew I had to try. My 9-to-5 job was still there, but it quickly became clear to me that the business wouldn't build itself. So I began putting in hours after work and on weekends. The first few months were brutal. I spent countless hours on my laptop, figuring out how to ship products, dealing with supplier issues, and trying to get my website to rank on Google. The stress was overwhelming. I still had to show up at my day job, meet deadlines, and maintain relationships with colleagues, all while trying to push my business forward. There were nights I cried, wondering if I was making a huge mistake. There were days I was ready to quit and just go back to the safety of my corporate job. But I kept going. Every small victory kept me moving forward. Then came the turning point. After a lot of trial and error, I finally managed to get my first batch of subscription boxes ready for sale. I launched the website and nervously waited for customers to order. I didn't know if anyone would buy, but to my surprise, the first few orders came in. It wasn't much, just a handful of boxes, but it was a start. It felt like validation. Maybe, just maybe, I was onto something. With the first few customers, I learned how important it was to deliver an exceptional product and experience. I took customer feedback seriously, constantly tweaking the boxes to make them better and more aligned with what people wanted. The more I interacted with my customers, the more I understood their needs. It became clear that this wasn't just about selling products. It was about creating a community of people who cared about the environment. As the months went on, things slowly started picking up. I improved my marketing strategy, started using Instagram to promote my products, and even launched a referral program. Word of mouth started working in my favor. I began seeing more consistent orders, and soon my subscription box service was covering my costs. Then, it started turning a profit. That was when I knew I had something. But the real game changer came when I took the leap and quit my job. It was terrifying. I remember handing in my resignation letter, my heart racing. I was going all in on my business, and the safety net of a steady paycheck was gone. I told myself, if this doesn't work, I can always get another job. But deep down, I knew I couldn't go back. It's been 2 years since I made that leap, And today, my business is thriving. I've expanded my product line, increased my customer base, and built a small team to help with operations. We're now a six-figure business, and I'm more excited about the future than I've ever been. But the road here wasn't easy. There were countless challenges, moments of doubt, and nights I wondered if I made the right decision. But I never stopped. If you're sitting there, reading this and wondering if you should take the leap, I can't give you a definitive answer. But I can tell you that there's no such thing as the perfect time. You'll never feel fully ready. The key is to take action, to keep learning, and to believe that it's possible. It's not going to be easy, but if you stick with it, the payoff is worth it. Take the risk. Build something you're passionate about. The first step is always the hardest, but trust me, it's the most rewarding. I never thought I'd be where I am today. 10 years ago, I was working a 9-to-5 job at a mediocre company, just trying to make ends meet. Life was fine, but it didn't feel like I was living for anything meaningful. I remember sitting in my cubicle, staring at the screen, thinking about how much time I was wasting. The money was decent, but I felt stuck in a cycle, and it felt like it was taking a toll on my soul. I kept thinking, there has to be more to life than this. The idea to start a business came from a random conversation I had with a friend who was an aspiring entrepreneur. One evening, we were talking about the potential of online businesses, how easy it seemed to get started, and how everyone was talking about passive income. I didn't know much about any of it, but that conversation sparked something in me. It was like a light bulb flickered on inside my head. I knew that if I didn't take a leap now, I might end up stuck in the same spot for the rest of my life. At first, I had no clue where to start. All I knew was that I wanted something that could give me the freedom I craved, something that would allow me to build something of my own. After weeks of researching, I stumbled upon e-commerce. It seemed like a practical entry point, low startup costs, lots of potential, and you could run it from anywhere. I knew nothing about online retail, but that didn't deter me. I was determined to figure it out. I spent hours watching YouTube tutorials, reading articles, and even taking free courses to understand the basics of dropshipping. The idea was simple enough. I'd sell products through an online store without having to keep inventory. Once someone bought something, the supplier would ship it directly to the customer. It sounded too good to be true, but it seemed like the easiest way to start. I was working full-time, so I would dedicate my evenings and weekends to building my online store. It wasn't glamorous. I spent countless hours selecting products, designing a website, and setting up the logistics. There were many nights when I would stay up until 2 a.m., only to wake up at 7 a.m. for work. I was constantly juggling my day job with this new venture, but I believed it would pay off in the long run. The first few months were brutal. I launched my store, and nothing happened. I didn't get any sales for weeks. I remember refreshing the page every few minutes, hoping to see even one order come through. But nothing. My traffic was low, and the few people who visited the site didn't buy anything. I started doubting myself and wondering if I had made a huge mistake. Then one day, I got my first sale. It wasn't much, just a small order, but it was a turning point. I remember the rush of excitement. Someone, a complete stranger, had bought something from me. That moment made all the late nights, the frustration, and the doubt worth it. It proved that it was possible. The next step was to figure out how to grow. I had to learn about digital marketing, how to drive traffic to my site, and how to convert visitors into customers. I read about Facebook ads, Instagram influencers, and email marketing. I experimented with different strategies, sometimes spending money on ads that didn't work, but slowly, I began to see what worked and what didn't. I learned that in e-commerce, it's not just about having a good product, it's about marketing. The key was to find a niche market, something unique that would differentiate me from the thousands of other e-commerce stores out there. I started to target a specific demographic, focusing on people who were passionate about a particular hobby. Once I narrowed down my audience, I tailored my marketing and product offerings to them. It wasn't an overnight success. There were many failures along the way. I had products that didn't sell, ads that bombed, and suppliers who dropped the ball. But with each failure, I learned something new. I refined my approach, adjusted my marketing, and constantly tested new ideas. The breakthrough came when I partnered with a popular influencer in my niche. They posted about my product, and suddenly, my sales skyrocketed. The influencer's endorsement provided the credibility I needed to establish myself in the market. From that point forward, I started scaling up. I reinvested every penny I earned back into the business, improving my website, increasing my ad spend, and bringing on more products. Fast forward to today, and my business is thriving. I no longer work my 9-to-5 job. In fact, I've expanded into multiple online stores and created my own brand. I've even started a podcast and a blog to help others who are looking to start their own online businesses. I'm living a life I never imagined possible, and I owe it all to that first small step I took all those years ago. Of course, things aren't perfect. Running a business is tough, and there are days when everything goes wrong. But I've learned to embrace the challenges. I've built a team that supports me, and we're constantly working on improving the customer experience, expanding our product lines, and pushing the boundaries of what we can achieve. The biggest lesson I've learned is that success doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to fail and learn from those failures. I could have quit when things weren't working, when I wasn't getting sales, but I didn't. Instead, I kept going, kept learning, and kept improving. The process of building my business taught me more about myself than any job ever could. If you're reading this and you're feeling stuck, know that it's possible to change your life. It won't be easy, and there will be times when you question whether it's worth it. But if you're passionate and committed, you can create something amazing. Don't let fear hold you back. Take that first step and keep going, even when things get tough. The road to success is rarely smooth, but the rewards are worth every obstacle you face. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. I'm no longer just surviving. I'm thriving. And if I can do it, so can you. I always thought that the perfect moment to start a business would come eventually. That someday, I would have the right idea, the right amount of money saved, and the right network to back me up. Turns out, that day never came. Instead, I was forced into the leap. And when I took it, I had no idea what I was doing. But I'll tell you this, it was the best decision I ever made. I had a fairly conventional start in life. I went to college, got a degree, and landed a good job at a mid-sized tech company. I was in my mid-20s, on track for promotions, and living in a decent apartment. To the outside world, my life seemed like it was going exactly as planned. But on the inside, I was feeling trapped. Every day felt like a repeat of the last. I was managing teams and handling projects, but none of it excited me. I didn't wake up with any sense of passion or purpose. It wasn't that I hated my job. In fact, I had a lot of respect for my colleagues and the work we were doing. But it didn't light a fire in me. I wanted more. I wanted to create something, build something from scratch that could truly make an impact. The problem was that I didn't have any experience doing that. And the fear of failure loomed over me every time I thought about leaving my comfortable paycheck behind. So I kept putting it off. Then, one day, my world came crashing down. The company I had been working for went through a major restructuring. It wasn't just a few layoffs. This was a full-on, company-wide overhaul. It hit like a ton of bricks. My role was eliminated, and within weeks, I was out of a job. It was a wake-up call. I was no longer in control of my future. No matter how hard I worked, how many hours I put in, the company's decisions ultimately determined my fate. And I hated that. I spent the next few months unemployed, doing everything I could to stay busy and distracted. I started freelancing, consulting, and picking up odd jobs. But deep down, I knew I couldn't go on like this forever. I was tired of being reactive, of just waiting for something to happen. I wanted to take control of my own future. And that's when the idea hit me. I had always been passionate about fitness, and over the years, I had developed a deep love for hiking. But the problem was that whenever I went on a hike, I found myself carrying way too much gear. Water bottles, snacks, sunscreen, and a jacket all crammed into my backpack. It was annoying and cumbersome. I thought, why isn't there a more efficient way to carry all this stuff? That's when I came up with the idea for a modular hiking backpack, something customizable that could expand or contract based on the hiker's needs. I had no experience in product design or manufacturing, and the thought of creating a physical product seemed intimidating. But for the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose. I wanted to make this idea a reality. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much the market was missing something like this. I started researching different manufacturers, watching YouTube videos, and reading up on how to create a prototype. After a few months of working on the idea during my free time, I had my first prototype. It wasn't perfect, but it was something I could physically touch and hold. I felt a sense of pride that I had built it from nothing. And then the reality hit me. I had to figure out how to sell it. I didn't know the first thing about marketing or e-commerce. but I had learned enough to know that this would be the next hurdle. I created a simple website, set up social media accounts, and started documenting my journey. I wasn't sure if anyone would care about a backpack, but I knew that I couldn't just expect people to find it. I needed to put it out there. I started creating content about my hiking adventures and the struggles I faced with regular backpacks. I shared my story of how I came up with the idea and how I was working to bring it to life. To my surprise, people started taking notice. They loved the idea. Slowly but surely, I started receiving orders. The first few were from friends and family, but after a few months, I began to see organic traffic on my website. Orders started coming in from people I didn't know, and the excitement I felt was unmatched. But the journey wasn't smooth sailing. After my first batch of backpacks arrived from the manufacturer, I realized that there were issues with the stitching and some of the zippers. It was a nightmare. The last thing I wanted to do was send out defective products, so I had to halt sales and sort through quality control issues. I wasn't sure if I'd recover from the setback, but I didn't give up. I contacted the manufacturer and worked out a solution. I revised the design and ensured that the backpacks met my standards before relaunching them. It took longer than expected, but eventually, I was able to get the product back on the market. At this point, I had learned a lot about logistics, customer service, and how to deal with setbacks. Sales started picking up again, and I began reinvesting my profits into marketing and expanding my product line. I added more color options and different sizes for different hiking needs. The community around my product grew, and I even started receiving feedback from customers who were passionate about hiking. They had ideas for improvements, and I took every suggestion seriously. Over time, I expanded beyond the hiking community and found that people from all walks of life were interested in my backpacks. A year after I launched, I was able to quit freelancing and focus on my business full-time. It wasn't easy, and I still had a lot to learn, but every day felt like a step forward. I'm now running a company that's making a difference in the outdoor community. The business isn't just about selling backpacks anymore. It's about building a brand that people trust and rely on. Looking back, I see how everything that happened led me to where I am today. If I had never been laid off, I might never have taken the plunge into entrepreneurship. If I had kept waiting for the perfect moment, I would have missed out on everything I've accomplished. I'm not saying that being laid off was the best thing that ever happened to me, but it forced me to take action and face my fears. If you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, know that the perfect time doesn't exist. There will always be reasons not to do it. But at some point, you have to take that leap, even if you don't feel ready. Believe in yourself, keep learning, and be prepared to fail. Because if you're willing to learn from those failures, you'll get closer to success than you ever thought possible. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.